Detroit AllyCat, and you're watching my show. I am going to tell you about a little town in Michigan called Jackson, Michigan, that was actually created in the 18th century, and it has a very spooky past, or at least has like a story that goes with it. It's about a little girl named Mary, and she haunts the city still to this day, allegedly. So without further ado, let's get spooky. And I think my spooky sign needs new batteries, but that's okay. That's okay. Jackson, Michigan is like on the far west side of the state, and it is one of the more historical cities here. I don't live that close away. It's about 2.5 hours away from where I live, but it's actually very beautiful, and a lot of the houses are like this old southern gothic looking. It's not southern, but it's very goth. And little Mary, she was 7 years old, and she has quite the story. Apparently, she was one of the founding family buried in Hillcrest Memorial Cemetery at North Elm in Jackson, Michigan. And it is said that little Mary at night can be seen wandering the cemetery looking around, and you can also hear scratch marks and crying. It was so bad that people actually started going there and vandalizing little Mary's grave, and so they had to actually close it off to the public. I'm going to tell you the story of Little Mary. Little Mary's grandfather was Moses A. McNaughton. He was a Jackson pioneer and a doctor. He went on to be a railroad developer and a real estate agent. He was very successful at what he did, and he is part of the reason that Jackson City is what it is. He was a former state senator and actually became the mayor of Jackson. So Mary was Moses A. McNaughton's granddaughter. Mary's father was a partner in the family business. He helped with the real estate. He did a lot of entrepreneurship. So they were a very well-known family. They lived in a mansion that was on Blackstone Street. How would you like to grow up on a mansion on a street called Blackstone Street? I thought that was really cool. I don't know. I'm a sucker for old, beautiful houses. In the summer of 1892, Mary fled Jackson with her mother and her 3 sisters. Her mother's name was Elizabeth, and her 3 sisters were Edith, Ruth, and Helen. They had to escape to Brighton, which is another city here in Michigan, because a diphtheria and the typhoid fever was raging in Jackson, Michigan, and they really needed to get away. Back then, there was medical science wasn't as good as it is now, so what people did was they either just fled the area or they stayed away from everybody. Kind of sounds like something that's going on right now, but that is what happened. While little Mary was gone, in 1892, it was the summer, Mary started to have pains in her abdomen, and they actually found out that it was an infection called periodontitis, which I really hope I'm saying right, because that sounds like something you would do in a dentist office. But basically what it was is it's an infection that is caused by inflammation in the abdomen area, and they actually found out that Mary developed it because her appendix ruptured. And back in the day, when your appendix ruptures, you could die from it. It was a very serious thing. And actually, still to this day, if your appendix ruptures and you do not make it to a hospital in time, you can still die. But unfortunately, little Mary ended up dying from this, and it was a very sad thing because she was only 7 years old. Her family decided to come back to Jackson, and that's actually where they buried her. She died on July 18th. So when they buried Mary, the cemetery was called the Hillcrest Memorial Cemetery, and her grandfather cared so much about Mary. He's actually the one who made the cemetery specifically for Mary so she could be buried there, and many of her family members can be buried there too. And she's still there to this day. Now the cemetery has been renamed and it's called the Oaks Cemetery. Now, here's where the spooky part gets started. It's alleged that Mary's mother woke in the middle of the night and just started screaming out, and she was like walking through the house screaming, and her husband was like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Mary is not dead. She's been buried alive. We have to unbury her and we need to see what's going on." And they said that Mary's mother, Elizabeth, was completely inconsolable, so they went ahead and took casket out of the ground, exhumed it, and when they opened up the casket and they looked at it, they saw scratch marks on the casket, which is actually a very believable thing because back in the day, they accidentally buried people alive all the time, which is, I don't know if I did this story yet, but have you ever heard of the expression "saved by the bell"? What they would do is they would put a bell next to the tombstone, and they would put the bell string all the way into the casket. So if somebody was buried alive, they could ring the bell and they could be saved. And they actually had people working in the graveyard that would walk around and wait to listen for bells. I do not know if this is something that was going on in Mary's situation. They never said anything about rung by the bell, but when I had heard that, they saw scratch marks on the coffin, that it just reminded me about the story of Saved by the Bell. And it turns out that Mary was actually buried alive, but when they unburied her, it was too late. She was dead. She was put back into the ground. And the story goes that, when you go to the cemetery, you can hear Mary crying, you can hear scratch marks, her trying to claw herself out of the coffin, and it's even said that you can see her walking around the cemetery. Now, when Mary's family was questioned about this about 50 years ago, they said that it was absolutely ridiculous and this is not a true story. But I will tell you this. There has to be a reason why that story was told. And when you have a historical family that has a lot of pride, they're not going to sit there and talk about how their child was buried alive on accident because it brings shame to the family. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched that the family actually just said that to one, make people stop vandalizing Mary's grave, and two, kind of hide the shameful past that they buried a 7-year-old little girl alive. Like I told you, Mary's grave still stands in Jackson, Michigan to this day, but because it was being vandalized so much, they had to cut it off from the public. But in 1996, they actually started doing live tours, and that way they could talk about Jackson City and talk about the history and all the different things that happened and explain the story of Little Mary McNaughton. I don't know if they did it last year, 2020, because of everything that was going on, but I do know that they said that they were currently doing them up to date. I thought that this was a really interesting story. I think it's kind of tragic that little Mary died, but in 1892, it was not very uncommon for children to die of diseases or have unexplained deaths because medical science was not what it is. And if you go into very old historical graveyards, you will see a plethora of children graves and baby graves and all kinds of things like that, which is very tragic, but it was very common. And thankfully that has slowed down because medical science is now way surpassing what it was back in the day. But I did think this was a really interesting story, and I would love to know if anybody has heard of Little Mary McNaughton, and if they've been to the graveyard. Have you seen the little ghost of her? I personally believe that this story is true about exhuming the grave with the claw marks, because that is something that I've heard of happening again, and I don't understand how a rumor like that could have gotten started. But, you know, the family is saying no. And what's really interesting is that Little Mary McNaughton's death certificate, it's not in the I don't know, there's a record place that it's supposed to be, and it's not in it. It's only in the city town hall, which is not technically a medical record. That's something just a historical artifact. If we didn't even have that in the town hall, we wouldn't even know that she existed. So they could pretty much say whatever they wanted about her and how she died. There's no proof of that. Anyway, if you like this story, I would hope you would think about subscribing to my channel, giving me a like, telling me what you think. I haven't done a spooky Saturday in forever because it's just been a very heavy year, but 2020 is over with and it is 2021, and I am going back to being spooky and fun and doing more YouTube things, and I think you should go back to being happy and saying this is a brand new year, and I wish you guys all the best. And yeah, subscribe, hit that bell button too, and remember, stay safe and stay spooky. Bye.